Hi. This is me back again. We're going to start a fresh stream here. I started and then got a phone call immediately. I am learning to draw this week. I'm going to put up a video about this a bit later on. But I'm going to spend a week, 20 hours, doing different things. And the first one is learning to draw. And as you can see here, I'm doing some practice right now. I'm drawing with a simple pen. This is a dip pen that I bought from Amazon that cost me about £5, and a little pot of black ink. This is Winsor & Newton India ink. Other than that, I'm just drawing on print paper at the moment. I have no great experience behind me. I've done a little bit of art just very casually, just for fun, but I want to do it properly. So I'm using the DrawAbox software to start with as a way to learn. And the first exercise that I'm doing, I'm not going to do the really basic ones because I think I have reasonable pen control bits. I've done a little bit of practice before. But the first one I'm doing is drawing these ellipses. So the exercise is to draw like an off-kilter square. I don't know, we've got a trapezoid, I guess. Join up the corners. Join up the sides. And then to draw an ellipse in the middle. So ellipse that kind of goes around like this. The idea is to try and get this ellipse to kiss the sides appropriately. So it should be like this. And this is going to be terrible to begin with, I'm sure, but that's the point, isn't it? We're going to start bad, and we're going to suffer through it, and then hopefully by the end of the week we'll get good. We're not going to spend the entire week doing exercises, of course, that would be horrible. But I'm going to start off with a warm-up exercise each time, and then I'm going to try doing some of the more fun things. What I want to do here, so I've been doing lots of stuff for my role-playing games. I play role-playing games. I mainly play as a games master. I love being a player as well, but as anyone who does role-playing games knows, games master is always hard to come by, and I quite enjoy that. So I often end up being the games master. And as a consequence of that, it's really nice to be able to do some illustrations. And so that's kind of why I want to build this skill. I want to get to a point where I can do some fun illustrations that will capture the imagination of my players and help them think about the things that we're doing in the game. Which is, I think, a modest and reasonable thing to be trying to achieve. So let's do this. Get used to this pen because it wasn't always put out like I had expected to. So there's definitely something unusual about how the pen works. This is not the same as I'm used to, so if you've just drawn with biro pens or written with biro pens anymore, then the dip pen is different, but I really like the idea of a dip pen. I've seen some pretty ones that are made out of glass and bits as well, which are very tempting. But before we go into wasting money on fancy tools, we're going to just learn with the basics. Well, I'm saying this, I don't know how basic this is, because although it wasn't expensive, it still feels like a really nice quality bit of work. I was tempted to try using digital too, but the DrawAbox was emphatic to not do that. And I think there's something nice about being away from the computer, because I do spend a lot of time on the computer. I like doing things like coding and other computery projects. So it's a good idea to get away and do something just a bit different. And to do something a bit human, which is all the more important, I think, at the moment, isn't it, with the way that things are going? The AI revolution, as it stands, seems to be swallowing up everything. And yeah, maybe it's quite nice just to do something that's just a bit boring and old school and analog. If anyone's experienced with dip pens as well, then please, point out anything stupid I'm doing, because I do not know what I'm doing. This is very much a new experience for me. I could be doing very silly things. I'm certainly doing very silly things. So we're gonna try and go. Yes. Trying to pay attention to what they were saying, which is to go from the shoulder ghost first. I think the idea of this exercise is to try and improve my accuracy so that I feel more comfortable drawing lines. I think I'm quite good with the lines here. So if I'm going from here to here, I'm not too bad at using my shoulder to get something that looks relatively straight. He says drawing a really wonky line. But the ellipses are hard. They're really hard. But the idea of being able to draw is really cool. I'd love to be able to put out some really cool stuff. And I want to be able to do it from imagination because I want to be able to draw things like for the role-playing games. So I think the only way to do that is through skill, practice. Right? Is to develop that skill through practice, right? I've done a little bit of painting before, and I can, if you give me a picture and a digital brush, I can do you a reasonable facsimile in using what I see. I followed some tutorials along that. What's his name? Cynics, the YouTuber, did before, and they're quite fun. But yeah, it's I feel like I'm a copy machine at best. Even then, not a particularly good one. So this is a different new skill. It's going to be a fun year though. So this is the first in a range of things I'm going to do, and the idea is I'm going to challenge myself every week to learn something new. It might be building on a skill. So in the case of this, I may find that I get far enough that I want to develop this somewhere further, and I have another specific goal for the following week. Might be something completely different. So I want to do a whole host of different things that are kind of in my mind of, I've never tried that, so it'd be nice to learn. I want to do some creative writing, which is interesting. I've started learning that actually, and it wasn't as terrifying as I thought it was going to be. So again, this comes down to my role-playing game world. So one of my things I find really, really interesting is developing fictional cultures. That sounds weird. Kind of is weird. It's one of those nerdy things. We all know about nerdy hobbies, don't we? But I find them really interesting. I came to this because I used to do my studies. I have a philosophy degree, and when I was doing that and looking at ancient philosophy, I always found it really interesting, thinking about the cultures in which some of those ancient writings took place. One of the things that surprised me the most was the first time I was reading Plato, in particular. And I think it's because my only real reading of ancient texts up until that point was, probably like many people, through the Bible, because I'd gone to a Christian school as a kid, and so I'd come across Bible texts and Bible stories. But they always felt very distant and very old-fashioned because we used the King James. The King James Bible, if you're familiar with it, is intentionally kind of oldie-woldy. It's the biblical literature version of going to a theme park that has ye old, chocolate store or something. So it was intentionally written that way in a kind of an old-school, anachronistic language at the time. It's not even representative of the language of the time in which it was produced. And it was done because that was deemed to sort of be more authoritative, I think. And it's a reason that I think a lot of biblical scholars now really don't like the edition, and I strongly recommend you avoid it if you're looking to sort of have an academic understanding of the text, as opposed to if you just you want to read the text for its poetic beauty, fair enough. If you think it's poetic beautiful, then go for it. But anyway, the point I'm making is that it's got this very kind of very obtuse, very high brow feeling language, and that was really my only experience of reading anything which would be an ancient text. It wasn't until I got to university and started reading Plato, and then later on went and read things like translations of Gilgamesh, that I realised that how normal and modern like a lot of the writers were at that time. And it's weird like having that experience of hearing a voice from a long time ago who is incredibly familiar in how I like are concerned with the world. And the one that gets me the most is I think I came across it through. There's a fantastic podcast series called Fall of Civilization. It's very famous, so you may well have come across it. If you haven't, my goodness, go and check it out. It's amazing. And the Fall of Civilization, yeah, so they talk about this tablet that comes from a Sumerian city. So this is going way back before the times of Plato, or even before things like the earliest books of the Old Testament. And it's they've got lots of these clay tablets, right? Because the Sumerians they would write on clay tablets, and clay tablets are pretty durable compared to the other sort of things that often people write on leaves or paper, papyrus. Very perishable. Clay tablets, on the other hand, particularly in the hot places in which they were used, tend to be enduring. And this is one which is like it's from this boy who is from what we might even now call a middle class family. I think his parents are they're essentially professionals in the city, and he's writing to his mother complaining that he doesn't have any nice clothes to wear, and that he goes to school with a boy who is the son of someone his father employs, but that boy has nicer clothes, and he's very, very perturbed by this. He wants to be more fashionable, he wants to have nicer clothes, he wants to look better and be more like his peers. And that's just like, it's a very interesting thing, right? It feels like something that might have been written in 2020, and yet it was written in like 3000 BC by a boy who is completely lost to the annals of time, save for that one little moment in which he is someone berating his mother rudely. It's just a very interesting thing to read. But anyway, I digress. I'm really interested in ancient cultures, and I'm really interested in just how cultures develop generally. And I want to, I like to spend a bit of my time building those cultures for my game worlds. I find this really interesting to do, and it also makes my game worlds more alive. Because if I understand a culture and it's got grounding and background beyond sort of the obvious, it tends to make for a richer experience and an easier experience to understand and engage with. I'm getting a lot of ink everywhere here. And I've been working on this for a fair while, and the way I work is I tend to look at like real world examples of cultures and draw a little bit from them. I don't copy individual cultures, but rather try and build something original, but that is grounded in looking at historic examples of how they've developed in similar kinds of conditions. And the thing to do is to like try and avoid what they call the Planet of the Hats, right? So if you haven't heard of that, it's a term, I think it comes from sort of commentary on the early versions of Star Trek. So if you go back to like the 1960s Star Trek, they would often have stories where they go in and they have some encounter, and that encounter happens on a planet because they're traveling through the universe. That's the premise, right? And because they have to consolidate that story into a sort of 30-minute TV show for a general audience that's often quite young as well, they simplify the people of that planet down to a very simple one or two characteristics. And so it's referred to as Planet of the Hats, where like the property of this character, everyone wears a fez on this planet, or everyone's really warlike, or so forth. Rather than them being sort of richly developed. And of course, this is not to say all Star Trek's like that. I'm sure that later versions of Star Trek and the extended universe and all of that goes into great deals more detail. So it's not saying that Star Trek is rubbish. It's just pointing out that it's a feature of those early series that they were constrained by what they were working with and the time they had and so forth, and so that's how it tended to work. And it's not something you generally want to do, though, right? So in your game, if you have orcs, let's say, for example, the temptation is to make orcs nothing but sort of comedy, stupid brutes who want nothing but to fight, and that can work. That can work, but it's much more interesting if you can build them up into being a more thought out society that have coherence, that have aims and ambitions of their own, and operate and function. And often that comes down to thinking about how they would work and operate. Complete that first assignment. How they would work and operate when it comes to things like that aren't combat, right? So if you think about how they sorry, I'm just having a look to see what the next. Okay, so my next challenge, I do funnels, which is what it's telling me to do is to start off with a line. This, and then we're going to make a funnel. This is essentially going to be the flat part. As it goes down, it's going to increase perspective slightly. Same thing goes as it goes up. Keep going up. And keep going up. Yeah, try that hat anyway. So yeah, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create cultures that have a bit more substance to them. That's one of the things I really enjoy doing. I've got like 4 or 5 like really quite fleshed out cultures that I have at the moment that I use within my role-playing games, and I want to keep doing that. But being able to learn to draw is going to be really fun because it's going to mean that I can sort of visualize them better, both for myself and also it's easier to communicate them to my players then if I can draw some visuals. This is a really good example actually of like why AI images won't suffice, right? So yeah, this is not me advocating AI images at all. This is quite the opposite. But it's, let's put aside the all of the arguments against AI images that we've heard, good arguments, and instead just focus on the whether even if that was the even if they were completely ethical, would they actually be any good? And for me, like in this case, like the answer is going to be no, right? And the problem is that I would only ever be able to get like generic stuff. So if I went to an AI and I asked for it to produce a fantasy character, it will produce something that probably looks fairly Dungeons and Dragons like. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but because Dungeons and Dragons is so popular, so that's going to be the sort of thing that dominates its understanding. But if I wanted something different, and particularly if I wanted that thing to be very specific, it would probably be very difficult to get it to do that in a way which isn't really compromising of what my vision was. And I think this is like the thing that people miss when it comes to, I mean, there's plenty of people that are fully aware of this problem, but I think this is the thing that a lot of people that do like AI miss when it comes to the systems, which is that, yeah, sure, you can prompt certain things. Like you could go to an AI now and you could prompt it for a short story. And it can write you one. And if you haven't looked at lots of other short stories of a similar ilk, it might even seem kind of good to begin with. We'll certainly have a good ability to do basic writing and sentence formation, grammatical construction, and understanding of how stories go together, and that will, if you have no ability yourself, that could seem really impressive. But, and I think this is the important part here, which is that it always moves towards a kind of average. And so you end up with something that feels very kind of mediocre, very similar to everything else that it does. And if you try and push it outside its comfort zone, it will break and give you weird results. Which is not what you want. Whereas, of course, if you were writing for yourself, now that would not be the case. It would take you a lot more time, a lot more effort to write for yourself. It would take more time to produce the work even once you were good at it. But what you would get would arguably have considerably more value and be much closer to your vision. So it depends on how much you're willing to compromise your vision, right? I think that's a big part of why AI solutions aren't good. AI images are always going to be fairly generic. AI writing is always going to be fairly generic. I saw someone say something the other day, which I thought was a very good take on it, which is that there's this danger that comes with AI systems, which is that it gives the incompetent the illusion of competency. So if you are not someone that is competent, and he was talking about how he was at work and he was getting certain people who were sending him through these sort of generated reports, and they were reports that were generated by Claude or Copilot or whatever system they were using. And he was saying how superficially these things looked great, right? They, if you didn't pay attention to what was in them, they looked pretty impressive. But actually, once you started reading them, they were just often full of gibberish. And you ended up getting very little value from them. But to the people who didn't really know the job to begin with, and who historically hadn't been able to produce reports at all, the ability to push a button and type in a basic instruction and effectively have this machine seem to produce something of value was very, very alluring for them. And he was arguing about how that's like quite a dangerous thing, which I think he's right on. Right? It's not competency, but it is the illusion of competency, and that can be a problem. I think a lot of companies are going to have a rude awakening when it comes to that. Right, that's my funnels done anyway, so that's what I meant to do there. So now I've got to do some boxes from perspective and projection. Is my next exercise. Before I do that, I'm going to have a little go, because it does say I should spend half my time just drawing stuff. And I think this is a good calibration test as well, right? Because if I do some basic drawings here now, then I can at least at the end of this process clearly see what that is like. So I'm going to just do some drawings for now. And I'm going to use reference because I think that's important. So I'm going to go on to Google Images. I'm going to start with trees. So let's just have a go at drawing some trees. And when I say I'm going to use reference here, what I'm not going to do is copy a reference beat for beat. Instead, I'm going to have a reference on the screen, so I've got a little bonsai tree on here now. And I'm going to use that as a rough guide, so I have an idea, and I don't just get lost. So what I'm going to be seeing here is I want to have a trunk that comes kind of down here. This is probably a fairly easy drawing for me to do. Doesn't mean it's going to be good, but it just means that I'm not really challenging myself to the hardest things, because in some ways a tree is kind of lumpy, right? And that probably makes this a bit easier because it's harder for me to be obviously wrong in a thing like a tree. So we have this like lumpy bottom edge to it, and then we're going to get like an S shape on it. We have this here. I think it's important to be comfortable with being bad at things as well. It was something that I came across quite early in my life because I decided I was going to take myself to music college. And I am not a talented musician, it turns out. I was about 16 at the time. had a fairly chaotic life because I was in foster care and didn't really know what I was going to do. And somehow in my head, music college had managed to sort of set itself as the thing that I was going to do. And if you honestly asked me if I was going to be any good at this, I probably could have told you no from the outset, right? But some part of me had decided that was what I was going to do. And to be frank, I failed and I failed hard. I turned up in a college. I managed to get myself in through the auditions, which was quite interesting. But that's because I kind of managed to play a few things to a reasonable degree of competence, and I think I scraped through. But very quickly found that I was outclassed by people who were way more experienced than I was, and had a better aptitude for it. So I'm not a believer in talent. It's worth saying that. I don't think that people often use the idea of talent to excuse themselves from making effort to try things, and I think it's important not to do that, because that can be a really destructive thing in our lives. But I do think that we have what I'm going to call aptitude, which is to say that there are certain things that some of us just have more innate ability to pick up. Everyone, even the most skillful people, have to put time and effort in to get there. And I think everyone, other than the people that have some kind of real blockage, like a disability that really stops them, can probably get to a decent degree of competency in almost everything. But nonetheless, I think I wasn't like in a position where I had the experience that was necessary at the time, so I'd bitten off way more than I could chew, and I was very quickly thrust into this place where I think what I should have done is go into the course one lower than I did. But the good part of that experience was that it taught me about failure early on. I had that experience of failure, and the funny thing is that, I don't know about you, but I find that things in the world are scary when you've never done them before, and that includes failing, right? I mean, like, failing can feel like something you really want to avoid until you've done it. And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, the life just still kind of went on when I failed. It was okay. You know, it didn't all vanish on me. I'm still here. I'm still surviving. Tomorrow will be another day, and all of that. And so maybe that was, it's a rather good thing, I think, in the end. It allowed me to sort of get a bit of perspective. And I think that's been useful in the sense that I'm not scared about trying things now. I'm not scared about sucking. It doesn't matter if I'm terrible at something, because I'm comfortable that A, sometimes it's okay just to not be very good at something, but just enjoy it. And B, if you put enough time and effort into something, you can probably get yourself to a point where you have competency enough to get along fine with it. I did that with music, actually. So I came back to music when I was in my 30s. I decided that I was going to play bass, which is always what I really wanted to do. Bass is my thing I enjoy the most, partly because I think bass is probably a better instrument generally, depending on what kind of music you like, than guitar, I'm saying, yeah. I'd say the two instruments I think are the most flexible are bass and piano. Guitar is really popular, partly because it's cheap, partly because it's so dominant in certain kinds of music. Tend to be very popular, certainly in the past, maybe not quite so much anymore. But yeah, guitar has always been super popular. Yeah, bass, I think, you've got a lot more styles that are very bass focused. It's only really the sort of rocks and metal where perhaps bass is less important. And that makes sense, right? Those are the kinds of music that maybe you don't dance to quite so much. Even then, you've got aspects of that. Like if you go into punk, sort of more punk pop and skate punk and that sort of things. So bands like Goldfinger and even Green Day and the like, and King Prawn, then bass is hugely important for them. So it's just this a small sort of subsection of music, which I think became very dominant for a long time and made bass seem like it was less important. And bass is a little bit more boring. It tends to be a little bit more follow of the guitar, very much a supporting instrument in some of the ones where it's a bit super guitar focused. But, yeah, no, bass is fun. But anyway, I went back and I learned bass, and I ended up playing in a band for a while, and we did a few gigs and bits, and it was good fun. And I'll be straightforward, we weren't about to take over the world. We were not amazing, but we were what we would call weekend warriors. We had a really good time. So the same thing's here. I don't think I'm going to become Kevin Conrad and or Jay Photos or another great pen link artist. But if I can get to a point where I can have some fun and I can make things that I enjoy, I think that's probably a big win. Hopefully some of you might decide to sort of join me on this journey and build some skills of your own. To do a few things that you haven't done before or thought you couldn't do. So I bet you can. I bet you have way more ability to do things and more aptitude than you would ever imagine you do. It's just sometimes hard to see that when your time is shy and you're tired from work. And I think as adults we sometimes can get discouraged. That's my first little tree. Right, let's do another one. I'm going to do. Let's do like a tree. I started that one too high, I think. I don't know why I did that, but I'm going to do some small tree now. As in, I'm going to do a big tree, but I want to draw it really small because I want to have a go at it. Drawing small is like interesting, right? Because you're going to have to like do things a bit differently if you're drawing small. You have to like find ways of showing the information with fewer lines and less resolution. So how would this be? And then we'll give this like a nice thick trunk down the bottom here. And I'm trying to think about this in terms of those ellipses that I was just doing, because like those ellipses right through here, aren't they? So it's going the main trunk's going to become this wonky shape up here. One of the things I don't understand, I really want to come out this week with a better understanding. So I was watching some sort of tutorial videos from people, and one of the things I keep seeing people say is like make good shapes, make interesting shapes, make good shapes. But it's not kind of clear to me what that means. It feels a little bit like someone saying make nice sound when it comes to music, and it's like, well, yeah, no shit. But like, what is nice sound? Like, that's the bit it's like how do I judge that? And I think this is one of those things where I just have to like kind of trust it a little bit, and as I go through, I guess I will figure out. I've seen people talk about things like hierarchies, so maybe that's the thing I need to look at more. Maybe it's like maybe there needs to be sort of a hierarchy of shape. Something like this, I guess. We need some more sort of foliage in the background there. I don't know, go through foliage and ink. That's an interesting one. Little shapes like this and see if it works out. Yeah, that looks alright. Okay. I'd love to go and do some outdoor drawing and painting. Maybe that can be one of the things that I do one of these weeks if I've got time. At the moment, I'm job hunting, so I have space, which is where this idea came from. Because since I'm spending my time doing job hunting in the morning, I end up with there's only so much job hunting you can do in a day because there's only so many jobs available. So once I've done the applications that I can do, and I'm working on some additional training to improve my chances, I want to spend the rest of my time doing something constructive. Do some stuff to like keep my job skill side of things up, but then do this as well. And this is kind of a cool tree, right? So if I'm still hunting for a job, which in many ways I hope I won't be, but if I am, then maybe I will do a week where I go out and about and do some drawing in the open world. I'm not actually too far from London, so I'm half tempted. Probably will actually go down to London and do some. Because there are loads of cool things to draw down that way, wouldn't there? I could do some of my hometown bits as well, but I feel like getting out and sort of seeing some things and having some drawings to show for it would be nice. It'd be nice to go to the museums as well. I've never been to an art museum. I've wanted to go for a long time. I actually really love paintings and art. I find them very impressive. It's something wonderful about seeing sort of the things that other humans make. Yeah, so I might treat myself to a day or two in London. Get the off-peak train in and see if we can do a little bit of drawing and painting while we're there and practice our skills. Be quite cool. Be good to take some photos and bits, I guess, as well, and sort of try to build up some reference materials. If anyone else like does their own drawing and painting, particularly for like illustrating their role-playing games and bits, I'd be really interested to know as well. Like what's worked for you and what your process was to get there, because it's a tricky one, right? I think learning a new skill is hard always because there's always two parts to it as well, right? Isn't there? I found this like when I was trying to learn music for the first time. It's like, well, you have the mechanical side of things. Like once you know what you're meant to learn, that's a really hard thing, and it takes time, and patience, and practice. And the other thing is like just knowing what to learn. I suppose that's where like a good guide or teacher comes in, because a teacher can't do the practice for you, but they can make sure that you're focused on practice that's appropriate to what you're actually trying to achieve. And that can greatly reduce the amount of time you end up spending wasted or otherwise suboptimal. The challenge with teachers is of course, like finding one that's actually good. I've had a few different people I've tried as guitar teachers over the years, and unfortunately, circumstances have always been that I've never managed to see it through. I started one and it was really nice, but I lost my job at the time, so I couldn't justify continuing to spend money. And then I've tried a few others, and to be honest with you, they just weren't very good. I went to somebody, and I'm not going to mention any names, so I can say this here. They were pretty incompetent, and there was no like standard for them to adhere to. So you get there and you think, oh, hang on a second, I'm paying you quite a considerable portion of money for this hour, and I don't think you're very good at what you do. But I think the benefit now in the modern age is that we do have things like the internet, right, where it is easier to seek out good sources and resources and get some of that information that you would traditionally get through a good tutor. It becomes easier to find it for yourself so you don't end up quite so lost. It's not perfect still. I still think there's a really big space in the world for really good tutors and one-to-one support and all of the stuff that comes with it. But if you're like me and you can't afford that at the moment, then it's much easier today than it ever has been. I think the biggest challenge for like people that are starting out learning new things right now is just to make sure that you like don't cheat yourself. It's not really possible in the drawing side of things, I guess. But I do a lot of software engineering coding, and I see people starting out now, and the temptation is for them to like run straight to AI coding, and that's fine. I mean, there's an argument for AI coding because it is incredibly fast, but it also means that if you're trying to learn something new and you end up AI coding, you are not going to be producing that thing yourself, and I suspect you're going to very quickly find that you're completely lost because coming into a code base that you haven't written yourself is always hard anyway. I've done that more than a few times when it comes to work. You join a new job and you suddenly turn up and you've got a new way of working and you've got to try and figure out all of the weird historic idiosyncratic things that have happened in that code base. And yeah, whereas if you build it yourself from the outset, it's generally much easier because you don't have that same level of challenge of trying to work out what on earth is this thing that I don't quite understand. Cool. That's a pretty cool tree, I think. Let's do a flower. I saw this really cool thing actually about roses, so I might try and do a rose. I'm just going to get myself a reference up. I wish I could remember the gent's YouTube. It was a short I saw, and he gave a little tutorial on how roses are. And I was like, oh, that's really clever actually. I hadn't sort of seen how they work before. But what he was saying is that they're essentially like these concentric rings. I can still see what you mean. So it starts off like here, right? Something like this, and then maybe kind of goes down like that, and then there's another one that comes around here. And then there's another one that comes around it as well. I think it's meant to be something like this. It doesn't look like a particularly good rose, but I think it's day one, right? It's day one. It's going to be rubbish. That's what we've been saying. So let's embrace the rubbishness and enjoy it. We'll see, because we're going to get to come back later. Hopefully, see lots of that improvement, right? Okay, maybe something like this for the outside bit. Here, like that. And then we have like the green bits, which reminds me of my paternal grandfather roses. Yeah, he was quite a keen gardener. Actually, both my grandfathers were keen gardeners, but my paternal grandfather, he didn't have a very big garden. He lived in a little council house, um, but he did have like a pretty little rock garden, and he always had like roses and other flowers. Like my other grandfather was much more of a practical gardener. He had a big allotment and grew a lot of veg and good to have fresh fruit and veg all the time. So, but yeah, my paternal grandfather more a flower and that side of things grower. As a That's something I'd love to do as well. Unfortunately, I live in a little studio apartment at the moment, so I don't have space for that. One day, one day, if I can get a little garden somewhere, that'd be amazing. I'd love to do some things like that. I'd love to learn to do some woodworking as well, and just like some more sort of craft with my hands. But it's just a case of getting a space to do that in. So we have to sort of be a bit selective about what we do. That is a rubbish rose, but I kind of see what I'm going for there. And then I'm gonna do a bumblebee as well. So let's have a look and see if we can find a bee. Okay, so all these are, you kind of have a head to start with, don't they? And they've got thorax. Is it thorax? I don't know. I can never remember what it's all called. I think the thorax the middle bit, or is the thorax the end bit? And they have this bit that goes like down here, like this. Let's draw through it. So I'm going to kind of like think about it in 3D, because that's kind of what I'm trying to do. It's going to make it a little bit scrappy, but I think it'll help. Something like that. They have these antennas, right? We need to get the wings as well, right? Let's see. Got some wings that sit on their back. I was looking ahead in the what's included in the drawer box, and like I think insects are one of the things that we're going to do, which is where this thought came from. I think that's what I'm thinking. Then another one here, right? This is like it goes up. This kind of big section. There's one more. Quite close together in their last legs. One thing we do need to do is give it a little bit of colour. Something like that. We should have one on the other side, shouldn't we? So this is going to be here, I guess. There we go. That's not bad. So that's essentially our first session there, right? So we've got somewhere to start. These are not terrible, I think. Yeah, when I look at these and I'm like, yeah, I could see that, like, where that's coming from, what I'm trying to achieve with them. It's not what I want to do in the long run, but it's not terrible. It's doable. So I think what I'm going to do is take a little break. I'm going to go for a walk, and then when I come back, I'll do the next section. What are we doing in Drawbox next? So ellipses, no more ellipses, thank you. And I'm going to kind of blast through a bit of Drawbox. I don't want to like get bogged down too much in all of it. I want to pick and choose the things that I think are going to be most useful to what I need to learn. I think that's probably useful with any learning, right? It's not to slavishly follow a curriculum if it's not really giving you anything. Sometimes that can be tempting. It looks like some horizons and rotations. Actually, that might be quite useful. Horizons and rotations, so maybe we'll do that next. And then, yeah, I think once we've done that, and we'll see what comes after that. Cool. We're going to start at least. So yeah, that's the other session one there. And it's been fun. It's been fun. If nothing else, it's nice to get the ink out and to have a go at doing things that are not just using the computer all the time. Cool. Right, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you in about.